Welcome everyone to Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Working People is a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and is brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network. This show is produced by Jules Taylor and made possible by the support of listeners like you. My name is Maximilian Alvarez. I'll be hosting new episodes this month, and my co-host Mel Buer will be hosting again in May. Today, we continue our coverage of the Trump-Musk administration's all-out assault on federal workers and the United States Constitution and its takeover and reordering of our entire system of government. In the last episode that I hosted at the end of February, I spoke with current and illegally fired employees of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB, as well as the USDA Agricultural Research Service. And we spoke in that episode about what was then a newly launched assault on federal workers, government agencies, and the people who depend on them by President Trump and Elon Musk, the richest man in the world and the unelected head of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Musk has been granted immense power to cut government agencies and their federal workforce and unprecedented access to sensitive government and citizen data. Now, that assault has continued. It's hard to sum up the scale and scope of the damage that Trump and Musk are wreaking upon our government and our government workers and contractors right now, all ostensibly in the name of increasing efficiency and rooting out so-called wokeness. But to give you a sense at the top of the show, here's the latest report from Newsweek. Quote, tens of thousands of job losses have been announced across numerous federal agencies. Last week, the Department of Health and Human Services announced that it will eliminate 10,000 jobs as part of a major restructuring plan. The Environmental Protection Agency plans to eliminate its scientific research office and could fire more than 1,000 scientists and other employees, according to the Associated Press. It has also been reported that the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, plans to lose about 18,000 employees, about 20% of its workforce. Meanwhile, former Postmaster General Louis DeJoy told Congress that 10,000 workers at the United States Postal Service would be cut. The Department of Education has announced plans to lay off more than 1,300 employees, while the Department of Veterans Affairs is planning a reorganization that includes cutting 80,000 jobs, according to an internal memo obtained by the AP in March. The Pentagon reportedly plans to cut its civilian workforce by about 50,000 to 60,000 people. At least 24,000 probationary workers have been terminated since Trump took office, according to a lawsuit filed by nearly 20 states alleging the mass firings are illegal. In March, 2 federal judges ordered 19 federal agencies to reinstate fired probationary workers. Meanwhile, about 75,000 federal workers accepted the offer to quit in return for receiving pay and benefits until September 30th, end quote. And last week, President Trump escalated his war on the federal workforce when he signed an executive order to end collective bargaining with federal labor unions and agencies with national security missions across the federal government, citing authority granted to Trump under a 1978 law. And as the AP reports, affected agencies could include the Department of State, Defense, Veterans Affairs, Energy, Health and Human Services, the Treasury, Justice and Commerce, and the part of Homeland Security responsible for border security. Now, the National Treasury Employees Union, which represents 150,000 government employees, has already sued the Trump administration over the executive order to end collective bargaining across the federal workforce. In response to these attacks, unions, social justice and community organizations, veterans groups, and people of conscience around the country are also showing up to local and national protest actions. They're showing up to town halls with elected officials and making their voices heard, signing petitions and writing letters to their representatives. And one such engaged group includes the Federal Unionists Network, an informal association of federal unionists and their allies. On their website, the Federal Unionist Network say plainly that, quote, Elon Musk is trying to steal the federal government, slashing public services, firing essential workers, and handing power to billionaires like himself. It's illegal. It's dangerous, and we won't stand for it. Through a mass action campaign, federal workers and community supporters will challenge every illegitimate and unjustified layoff. Instead of letting Musk steal their jobs, they'll show up for duty with a clear message. Let me work. I serve the American people, not the richest man on earth who nobody elected to be my boss. End quote. To get an inside view of the Trump-Musk administration's attacks on the federal government and the federal workforce, and why you and every working person should care about it, and to talk about who's fighting back, how they're fighting back, and what people can do to get involved, I'm honored to be joined today by James Jones. James is a maintenance mechanic with the National Park Service based in North Carolina. He's a veteran and a member of the Federal Unionist Network. James, thank you so much for joining us today on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Max. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's an honor to be connected to you, although, of course, I wish we were connecting under less horrifying circumstances, which we're going to dig into over, the next 50 minutes. But I wanted to just start here at the top, just kind of getting your response to all this, especially, since we're talking just days after Trump's executive order to end collective bargaining rights for workers like yourself across the federal government.
Well, I think as far as my union, I'm an AFGE member with Local 446 out of Asheville, North Carolina. I live in Boone. We expected a lot to happen from Trump's first term. He did things to attack our union the first time, and we expected him to do it again, albeit maybe not on this level. But I think maybe some people at the national level of AFGE would probably. They probably counted on what was going to happen, even with some of the atrocious things he's done already. AFGE and my local both, we've been fighting. AFGE National, they've sued the Trump administration over several of these illegal acts he's done after he came on, after his inauguration, like firing a bunch of probationary workers and some other things. And the courts have sided with the unions, AFGE especially, over some of these illegal acts. And I think, if you read the order, I didn't read it closely, but it did mention AFGE in that order, his EO banning collective bargaining for these agencies that are so-called entwined with national security. So to me, it sounds like it's retaliatory against the unions, the NTEU, the FFE, and AFGE for bringing suit against Trump because they're fighting back. And we're fighting back at the local level. We've held several rallies in Asheville. We had a town hall here in Boone. Our representative, Virginia Fox, never showed up. We had a packed house of 165 people, and she never showed up to address the constituents in her district, which was expected because we're a dot of blue and a sea of red here in Boone, North Carolina. So she usually avoids meeting with her constituents in Watauga County. So, and this Saturday, April 5th, we have a mass march and rally in downtown Boone to talk, to address the attacks on all these agencies and what it means for the American people. So I'll be there at that as well.
I definitely want to make sure that we talk a bit more later in the show about the attempt to repeal collective bargaining rights as if you could just sign that kind of thing away, and talk about the fight back in more detail, ending with the day of action coming up at this weekend. But I guess before we get there, let's take a step back, right? Because so much, as I read in the intro, so many federal workers are being impacted by this, and the amount of people who depend on their labor, is incalculable at this point. But when you start reading just the thousands and thousands of the numbers and the thousands of folks who are losing their jobs or getting fired or what have you, it's really easy to lose sight of the human beings behind every single one of those numbers. And I wanted to ask, for folks who are hearing those numbers, but they're not hearing the human beings behind them, if we could just talk a bit more about your time working, as a federal worker and in the National Park Service. Like, could you tell us a bit more about yourself, how you got into doing that work, and what, up until I guess recently, like that work entailed?
Yeah, so I started working with the Park Service in 2002. I served in the military prior to that, went to college, got 2 degrees, and decided I didn't want to do what I had gone to college for, like a lot of folks do, I guess. And just took a job with the Park Service doing maintenance work. And I've worked here on the Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina my whole career. So yeah, I started out as a wage grade 8 employee. I worked my way up to a wage grade 10. I'm still a wage grade 10 today, and I enjoy taking care of the park. I enjoy where I work. It's called the Moses Cone Estate. It's about a 4,000-acre estate. It's part of the parkway proper. There's 26 miles of historic carriage trails that I maintain, and then there's some other areas that we try to do historic preservation work to keep the facilities up, like the Cone Manor and the carriage barn and the historic apple barn and that sort of thing. Yeah, over the years, I mean, since I've been there in 2002, there's just been a steady decline, of money. The budget basically has remained static over that time frame. It's increased a little, but over the course of, say, 23 years, the budget has remained static, which is basically a budget reduction, right? Cost of living, cost of doing business keeps going up, but, your budget remains static. When you lose people to retirement, you're really not able to cover that position sometimes because you got to cover the cost of living raises, the cost of insurance, and all these other things go up. So over that span of time, we've actually lost employees in great numbers. And if you remember back in 2013, when they passed that sequestration bill, the Park Service, I think in general, lost about 30% of the workforce then. And we've really never retained that number of employees back since that time. And so now we're faced again with a possible 30% cut under Doge's proposal to cut the Park Service. We're already lean. I always joke and say, we're not down to the bone anymore. We're down to the marrow. We can't really operate anymore unless we get more money and people, and equipment and things to do our job. So it's been a struggle, especially for the last 12 years. And people are noticing, with the proposed Doge cuts and what they're saying about the Park Service, people here in this area, because most people love the outdoors, we're in the mountains, they're turning out. They're turning out and protesting this stuff. They don't want to see their parks decline further than what they already are. They want their parks to be taken care of. And when you still, I think the maintenance backlog now is something like, $16 billion for the whole Park Service because they just don't have any money to maintain a lot of the facilities and trails and roads and such. So this is just another blow. It's another gut punch to an agency that's already suffering, from a lot.
James, I wanted to ask a little more about what you were just talking about, right? Like, and because I think this is really important for, folks to understand, right? That it's not as if Elon Musk and Donald Trump have come with their axes and hatchets and started making cuts to fully funded agencies. Like, you were describing how, your agency has been, like losing budget and people for your entire time working there. And I wanted to ask if you could say a little more about like what that translates to on a day-to-day level for, folks who are still working for the Park Service when they have to now deal with an underfunded, understaffed agency, and what that looks like for, folks who are coming to take advantage of the parks and enjoy them.
Well, I'm sure, President Trump and Elon Musk don't visit national parks. So it's, they, and some of the other billionaires that he's appointed in his cabinet, I'm sure they don't visit those areas, public lands, because, they own their own land. They probably own as much land as some national parks have in capacity as far as acreage. But yeah, so any given day in the Park Service, at my park particularly, and I'm sure it's park wide, I know people that work in different parks around the country, you just don't get all the work done, right? I mean, things that need to be tended to, there's a priority list. Obviously, you got to do the things that take priority over other things. So if you don't have enough people to take care of what needs to be taken care of, that gets put to the wayside. And then the important things like, cleaning restrooms, cutting trees out of the road so people don't, hit a tree driving 50 miles an hour through the park. I mean, picking up trash. I mean, I don't do those things, but I do more of the skilled labor. But even then, you've got these systems, these infrastructure systems in the Park Service that are outdated, and most of them need to be replaced. Water systems, sewer systems, electrical systems. Most of the Park Service have antiquated systems. I mean, they're running. Some of these systems are probably 60, 70 years old. I mean, they've been upgraded some over the years, but a lot of these systems just need a total replacement. And so when more people visit the parks, which is the case year after year, population increases, more people come. We're not upgrading these systems. We're not building newer facilities, bigger facilities. We're not making more parking lots for people because there's no money. Then it takes a hit, and we have to shut these systems down sometimes because they're overwhelmed. The water system can't keep up. Our sewer systems can't keep up. People, the people park all over the place now. They're beating the sides of the road down, the shoulders of the road with their vehicles, and we don't have enough rangers to enforce a lot of the rules and regs on the park anymore. We've lost a significant number of law enforcement people. So, yeah, it's a problem, and it's going to get worse if we don't change course and protect our parks.
I want to ask like kind of a follow-up question to that is really for, anyone listening who is still sort of buying into, the justifications for this that are coming out of like the, Trump administration, all over Fox News, all over, Musk's, social media platform X, all that stuff. Like, what would you say to folks out there who are still convincing themselves that like, oh, it's a park, you don't need that many people, like I can just go and walk around, what do I need all these government aid workers for? Or like beyond that, like people who are pretending that, flesh and blood working people like yourself maintaining our parks are somehow like this, evil part of this evil deep state bureaucracy.
Well, we're not. We're working people. We live in the same communities as these people do. Our kids go to the same schools. They go to the same churches. We go to the same grocery store. Whatever. I mean, we're all part of the community. We're not some sort of evil sect or cult that we have ulterior motives in the Park Service or any other federal agency for that matter to do harm to people. And this notion that government workers are lazy, that one always floors me because I know plenty of people in government service that work hard and they're dedicated to their missions. Sometimes think the public may not understand the depth of some of the work government workers do because a lot of it is different than the private sector. Government doesn't operate to make profit. We're here to serve people. This notion that we should run government like a business, I don't buy that. We're not a business. We provide services, and since we're not in the business of making a profit, then maybe some people see that as they're not motivated enough to work hard because they're not making money. Well, that's not true. I myself, and I know a lot of other people that could quit government tomorrow and go to work in the private sector and make more money, but we don't because we enjoy public service. We enjoy providing. Me personally, I take pride in my work I do at my park because I know people come there, they enjoy my area of the park. They tell me a lot. I know people in the community in Blowing Rock where I work. They tell me, you do great work here. This place is nice. I mean, I take a lot of pride in that. And to me, that's more important than, making another $10 an hour somewhere, That's my take on it. And I think I can speak for a lot of other federal employees and AFGE members too, that work in different agencies with that.
Well, and I'm curious again, given that you've been doing that work, for decades, and you've seen, so many kind of changes in in American politics and the ways that the population talks about government workers, right? I mean, I remember, what was it like over 10 years ago, in Wisconsin, like, Scott Walker and the Republicans really rammed through a lot of these same like anti-labor policies, and including eventually turning Wisconsin into a right-to-work state, in a large part based on like vilifying government workers in the ways that you're talking about. So this problem is not new. I mean, I grew up conservative. I remember us talking about government workers this way, when I was a kid. I wanted to ask, like, if you could say a little more about like how deep that goes and sort of like how it's impacted you and other government workers, and like what we need to correct in the ways that we understand the work and lives of our federal workforce, to stop kind of falling into these traps of that lead to us just not caring when we slash budgets year after year, we lay off more people year after year. It feels like this has been a slow building crisis that's now just reached a critical point, but the roots of that run deep all the way through your career.
Well, Max, as well as I do, a lot of politicians hate labor unions. And it's pretty obvious why, because, unions traditionally have always been the tip of the spear to fight corruption, greed, these businesses that prey and exploit on people's vulnerabilities. I mean, it's been going on for, well over a century. Labor unions have had to fight and scratch for everything for their members. As Frederick Douglass said back in the 1850s, power concedes nothing without demand, and it's true. They're not going to give up anything. The billionaire class, they're not going to give up anything. They're just going to keep taking, and it's just sheer greed. It seems to me like a disease. I think the message needs to be that these people, and I think Bernie Sanders does a good job of messaging when it comes. He's always harping on the billionaire class. These people are greedy. They want everything, you have. They can't ever get enough. I think he was on the Senate floor yesterday, maybe the day before, addressing the Senate, how he's traveled the country and how so many Americans are fed up with the economy. You have two Americas, the ones with everything and the ones with nothing. I think that has to be the message. And as far as government workers go, we need to be in that category. We're working people. We're not special people. I think the other problem is too. A lot of the government has to abide by the law. President Obama, when he was in office, he had the standing that the federal government was a model employer. That we did everything by law, by reg, did the right thing, and I think that we need to get back to that. But in order to do that, there is a lot of, sometimes what people perceive as waste is just the government doing what they're supposed to be doing. A lot of private companies, I've worked in the private sector, they don't always do what they should be doing. They try every which way in the world to circumvent the law because it costs them money if they have to abide by all these policies that the government imposes on them. But, a lot of these policies are for good reason. They protect people. Health and safety. Look at OSHA. I when I was a local president, I worked closely with OSHA. Because when you work for an agency like mine, and even the VA, and I know people that work at the VA try to cut corners on safety and health, and you've got to have some sort of safeguard and check on that. And some people might view that as waste. That's for one example. That it shuts down production so the OSHA guy can come in and check on everything. But I mean, it's just the way things have to work, the messaging's just got to change with federal workers and state workers and local workers. We're not lazy people. A lot of it's just things we have to go by, through legislative action and law and that sort of thing. So.
Well, and it, makes me think about what you were saying earlier, right? About the fallacy of wanting government to be run like a business. Like that may sound good to certain people in theory. But like as someone who, my entire job is like interviewing workers in the public and private sector, I can tell you that most workplaces are dictatorships. Like where, your working person does not have any rights, let alone the right to make any demands on their employers without losing their livelihoods. And so why would we want that to be the model of our government? I think like there's really something missing for folks who like really aren't making the connection between like this is how businesses are run, this is how they treat their workers in America, and this is how it's going to look if that takes over government entirely.
Yeah. To me, corporations are tyrannies. There's no democratic process with corporations, private power. It's they have a board of directors. They make the decisions. I mean, there are some companies, like the automotive industry, the big three, where they're unionized, and the UAW has a lot of power, and they have good collective bargaining agreements. But if they didn't, they wouldn't enjoy those benefits and privileges that they have now through a contract. So yeah, at least with the government and in unionized workplaces, you have due process. With the federal government, it's a little more restrictive. We can't bargain over certain things like wages, health care, that sort of thing. But we can still bargain over a lot of things that affect our working conditions. And if that's taken away, then these agencies, a lot of them run just like a corporation. They're a top down. You have no rights. I mean, you have certain rights. I mean, I shouldn't say that, because you still have certain rights as a federal worker without a union, but I would prefer to have a union contract over any kind of administrative procedure that I'm granted. I'll put it that way, because I've seen both. I've seen how both work. I'll take my union any day over that.
James, I wanted to ask if you could just kind of follow up on what we were just talking about. For folks out there listening who may not fully grasp like the differences between, unions representing government workers and, other unions that they may have heard of, the Teamsters, UAW. Could you just say a little more for folks out there about like what the role of a union is for, a federal workforce like, the National Park Service where you work?
Yeah, so federal unions, they're like private sector unions, trade unions. They're there to protect the workers. They're there to promote better working conditions and that sort of thing. That we're no different in that regard. AFGE, my union, I'm sure NTEU, NFFE, they're there to bargain, collectively bargain with their respective agencies, better working conditions, and that can be everything from a grievance procedure to disciplinary adverse actions, overtime, your lunch break, when you're going to take that, your 15-minute breaks. And I want to say something real quick there. Some people don't realize this. The federal government does not have to give you 2 breaks during your workday. We have that in our contract. We get a 15-minute break, between the start of the shift and lunch, and get another 15-minute break between the end of lunch and the end of the workday. A lot of people don't realize that. They don't have to give you that. We have that in our contract. I mean, it's those little things like that make a difference, and I'm not saying some of these agencies might be very good and it doesn't matter, but, management comes and goes. And believe me, their solicitor and their HR departments tell them what they can get by with and what they can't get by with. I would much rather have that contract that outlines how they're going to treat their workers than not having that at all. So generally speaking, most unions, that's what they're looking to do is to promote good ties with management, improve the working conditions. We just can't do certain things, like the big one is strike. We can't strike, which is, I get it. You're a public servant, you go on strike. I mean, the taxpayers basically, they're paying you to work. So, that was laid out in the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act. The other ones are, we can't negotiate pay. We can't negotiate the amount of leave we get. All that is set by Congress. Congress, and you probably, a lot of people realize that every year the president presents a budget, Congress approves the budget, or they go back and forth until they get a budget. Federal employees usually get, depending on inflation, we usually get 2, 3, 4% cost of living raise at the end of the year for the following year. That's set by Congress and the president. We can't negotiate over that. A lot of private sector unions can. The UAW, the Teamsters, those big unions, they can strike their employer. If they don't like what's happening, their membership votes to strike, they go out on strike. We can't do that. So, we don't have a lot of power as related to some of those private sector unions, but we still have power as far as establishing certain things, certain rights in the workplace. And the billionaire class can't stand that. They pretty much destroyed the private sector unions. I think union density now in the private sector is 7%. The last number I looked at, or somewhere hovering around that. So we're now, it's probably lower. North Carolina is one of the lowest states. I think it is the lowest state when it comes to union density. It's the state I'm in. Public sector unions are up, I think, around 30-some%, maybe close to 40. And they want to get rid of that power. These billionaires, they want to take that away. Just 2 years ago, we had a decertification drive at my park where a disgruntled employee brought in the National Right to Work Foundation to represent her to decertify the union at my park, and we beat it. And these people, I think the National Right to Work Foundation, they're backed by the Koch brothers and other big moneyed interest. It doesn't even matter if these federal employee unions are part of their company, which they're not, but they know if they can keep undermining that power structure, it helps their cause. And that's why it's so important that we fight this and win it.
Well, and there's clearly some power on top of that, that has been frustrating the Trump administration in terms of the power of federal unions to stall or stop or challenge or reverse these decisions coming from the White House and Trump's administration. I wanted to ask, from your vantage point, from your union, why is he going after the unions and your collective bargaining rights? Trump is claiming that this is a national security issue. Do you believe that?
No, I don't. It's already in the Civil Service Reform Act. Certain agencies can't unionize that are involved with national security. The FBI, the CIA, National Security Agency. And then there's some other, smaller agencies out there that kind of fall under that umbrella. Maybe, I think some of the Department of Homeland Security folks, law enforcement types, I'm not sure, but I think there's some of those that are excluded. It's the same old playbook, right? They use this broad umbrella of saying, all right, all these agencies I'm going to declare part of national security. They're not part of national security. It's already in the law that there's certain agencies excluded from unionization because they're already involved with that. And I fought my own agency over this a few years ago. We had a guy, he was in IT when I was the local president, and they had him mislabeled as non-bargaining unit, as a non-bargaining unit employee, like management or HR employee. And he asked me one day, he's like, hey, James, he said, I want to join the union, but they say I can't because I'm non-bargaining unit status. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're in IT. So when I inquired about why they had him labeled as such, they said, well, he sees sensitive information because he's an IT guy. Well, so what? He's still eligible to join the union. So I had to file an unfair labor practice and force the agency to classify him as union eligible. And so he joined the union. But they come up with all these, it's no different than what Trump's doing. They come up with all these excuses, these legal arguments that, oh, well, we can't, we got to exclude all these people now from collective bargaining. That wasn't the reasoning. The reasoning was because AFG and other unions have beat him already on two big cases. One was the TSA. The other was the probationary people that were getting fired. I'm sorry, the TSA people, that's still pending. But the probationary employees, and then they filed the suit on the deferred resignation program, which they had to backpedal on that. quite a bit. So it's retaliatory for sure. I mean, I would think any judge or judicial panel would see that and say, basically what you're saying about national security is overly broad. It doesn't apply here because we've already got that in the law. It's already covered by, and secondly, it's clear retaliation. They even mention AFGE in the order, that they're thwarting Mr. Trump's agenda. Well, that's just too bad. That's what unions do, protect their members, right? I mean, yeah, it's insane. It is, but we'll still be here.
And like the thwarting of Trump's agenda thing, like two kind of questions on that. Like one, if this executive order just sort of like, became totally the law of the land and collective bargaining rights were gone, from these federal agencies, what would that look like for workers like you? And like, what would that mean for executing like Trump's agenda without the unions getting in the way? Like, why are they doing this?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I don't know. I think there's so much animosity at this point. Unions are still going to do what they're going to do, and they would still fight. You would just have to, you would have to keep filing actions against the government, against his administration, still follow your contract, still file grievances, whatever you needed to do, ULPs, et cetera, unfair labor practices, and then wait it out until he's out, and then have your day in court then and bring it all back. I mean, it's of course, I'm not an attorney. I don't know if they outlaw collective bargaining for these agencies. I don't know how that would work as far as getting any kind of recourse or being made whole. It probably wouldn't even happen, but I think there would still be a lot of resistance toward that. Another thing is if he's successful at this, that's going to be a green light for big corporations to basically go after their unions, just like the PATCO strike in '81. I'm old enough to remember that strike. I was 10 years old. And I remember watching it on TV, and my dad, he was a factory worker, unionized factory worker. And he said, we'll never get another contract, a good contract because of this. And he was right. That company he worked for, the union, basically, every time they'd go to negotiate a new contract, they just kept losing. They had to concede things. The company would say they're going to shut the plant down, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. And it's just been a steady decline since the PATCO strike. Basically the Reagan administration said, we're going to turn a blind eye. If you guys want to break labor law, go ahead. We're not going to do anything about it. And that would be the same thing today if they're successful in with this EO that he just signed, stripping away collective bargaining rights. But much worse, I think.
I work in the news, and it's impossible to keep up with all these executive orders, right? We've talked about on this show. I mean, that's very much, part of the strategy, right? The flood the zone, overwhelm people, hit people with so much bad news that we just become immobilized. And, unions may challenge some of them while others get through. It's been a very, dizzying couple months. I wanted to ask, like, what the last 2 months have looked like from your vantage point in Boone as a government worker, like in a union that represents workers across different agencies, like from Trump's inauguration to now. Could you just kind of give us a bit of a play-by-play on like how this has all unfolded in your life and how folks are reacting to it?
Yeah, obviously there's been a lot of uncertainty, especially for folks the probationary folks, after he was inaugurated and they first proposed firing all the probationary workers because, they were easy to get rid of, easier to get rid of, and that hasn't worked for him. And so, but still, even these folks that are probationary, they're still, hesitant because they don't know, even though a lot of them got reinstated, they're still going to do a RIF probably down the road. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure they will with certain agencies. I can't speak for my agency. I know they've offered another round of voluntary buyouts and voluntary early retirement. But yeah, it's been stressful. Even folks like me that have a lot of time, and I could have taken that first round of deferred resignation program when they offered it, but I don't want to retire right now. I'm just 53 years old. I've still got a lot of years left. And I'll retire on my terms, not their terms, That's the way I look at it. But yeah, I can't imagine some of these folks, folks that are just now getting into government. They're scared. They're scared. They can't plan. I mean, I've heard of stories where people moved all the way across the country to take another job. And these are people that have 5, 10, 15 years with the government. They took a new job. They were put into they accepted a new job series, which basically your probationary period starts over anytime you leave a job series, go into another job series. You still have a 1-year probationary period, and then to get fired after you've had that many years in, to say like, well, you're no longer needed, even though you've been a good worker and you've had good performance ratings. I mean, it's crushing for those people, I'm sure. I mean, and not all those people got their job back either. I think out of that 24,000, I think only 16,000 were ordered reinstated. So, yeah, I can't imagine having to moving to a new job, federal job, 2,000-3,000 miles away where I was at, and then told you're fired after you're trying to resettle in an area. I mean, it's just cruel, inhumane. It's just unbelievable. But yeah, as far as my agency goes, we don't have a lot of people anyway. As I mentioned earlier, we're down to we're down to the marrow. I call it the marrow instead of down to the bone. But I think we lost one probationary worker. That's all we had when that order was signed, and that person is reinstated. To my knowledge, has been reinstated. But I don't know what's going to happen with this VERA, the Voluntary Early Retirement Authority, that came back out, and the VSIP, the Voluntary Separation Incentive Payment. The Department of Interior offered that. They excluded my job series. I'm maintenance. The Department of Interior excluded a bunch of jobs from that where you couldn't retire early. Law enforcement, firefighting, wildland firefighting. And then the Park Service excluded just about all the maintenance positions, so I couldn't take it. I wouldn't have taken it anyway. But so I tend to think with maintenance, I mean, the reason they did that is because we don't have many people anyway. So if they get rid of all the maintenance, just close the parks, because you're not going to be able to go in the park because nobody's going to be there to do anything. So yeah, but there's a lot of other jobs I'm worried about that they'll try to riff. They'll try to do a riff if they don't get the so-called 30% reduction, which nobody seems to know what that means. There's been no guidance issued. 30% of what? 30% of this park, 30% across the board, 30% of a certain cap of money that they need to cut. I mean, who knows? Nobody knows. It's kind of like one of those things. They're just flying by the seat of their pants and doing things whatever they feel like when they feel like it. So that's the uncertainty of it too. You don't know.
James, we talked at the top of this episode about, the fact that you yourself are a veteran, right? That your union local AFGE, also represents workers at the VA over there in North Carolina, where you are near Boone. I wanted to ask just a little bit about that, like how all of this is hitting you as a veteran who has served your country and also served your country, like working for the Park Service. While, we're also seeing these devastating cuts to the VA, and so many veterans who are being affected by these cuts outside of the VA even as well.
Yeah, the VA, I'm disabled, so I use the VA for all my health care, dental health, vision, the gamut. And I've one of my providers, I do telehealth quite often just because it saves me from having to drive to Asheville, which is an hour and a half drive. And Hickory's about an hour drive. So I've been doing a lot of telehealth appointments over the years, and now that a lot of that's gone because of the return to office mandate. A lot of these counselors and some other people were able to telework, at home to treat veterans, especially with like mental illness stuff. Therapists, certified mental health counselors, that sort of thing. They were working at home. And even some of the people in admin that I know that work at the VA in Asheville that do billing, they were able to work at home and do billing. And this notion that, we got to get everybody back in the office because they're not doing anything. Well, that's a total lie and a myth. The VA uses tracking software on these folks that do telehealth. They know when they're working. They know when they're not working. They're not at home doing nothing, or doing the laundry, or on the treadmill, or whatever you want, whatever these people think. I mean, they're being tracked. They have to meet their production quotas. But now, since they're back in the office, especially like with the care, with veterans care, now I'm having to wait longer to get an appointment, like for my mental health counselor, because now he has to drive 45 minutes to work to the nearest facility, and you say, well, that's not much. Well, that's time he could be at home working, helping another veteran, I mean, it's, I don't understand where they get this, that people that telework or work remotely don't do anything, because I'm pretty sure most of the federal government, especially the bigger agencies, well, even the Park Service, we had some folks that teleworked. They have tracking software. They know what they're doing. I mean, if they're not working, if they're down less than, more than 10 minutes, they get a text or an email. What are you doing? I mean, I don't know how it works. I don't telework, but I've been told that by many employees that our union represent. It's not, there is accountability with that system. But yeah, that's just one thing. The other thing with veterans care, I mean, I think President Biden ordered about 60,000 people hired after the PACT Act was signed in 2022. They needed those people to file more claims, to help process claims that veterans were filing after the war in Afghanistan ended in sometime in 2021, 2022. I can't remember, right after Biden took office. There's been a flood of veterans from that era, from Iraq, from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that have come into the VA fold. Thousands of veterans, tens of thousands of veterans. And this administration is proposing to go back to the 2020 levels of VA staffing. Are you kidding me? You've grown the veteran population tenfold since then. It's not like they've, Secretary Collins, the VA secretary, said something the other day on TV about the VA is not an employment agency. Like, dude, you've got all these veterans coming back from Afghanistan that are filing, even veterans like myself. I filed on the PACT Act. I'm a Gulf War vet. I filed on the PACT Act as soon as it was passed. There's some Vietnam era veterans that filed under it. I mean, you've got a flood of claims being filed, and plus people with real health issues, me included. I've got breathing problems. I've got all kinds of issues from my service in the Gulf War. It's all connected. And for them to propose to reduce 80,000 positions in the VA system because they call it bloat or waste, it's a farce. They're basically sticking their nose up in the air to all of America's veterans, the people that went over and served their country and sacrificed everything.
I mean, even just hearing that, I mean, like, gets my blood boiling. I can only imagine, what it feels like for you and other people who have actually served in the military. I have not, right? And like, it really brings us to kind of the point that we're at now, right? Where I think like the rage is really setting in. For the past 2 months, there's been a lot of fear, understandable fear. I am a brown tattooed man in the state of Maryland, where someone who looks like me just got abducted and disappeared to a fascist colony in El Salvador under a quote unquote administrative error by the Trump administration. And now he's going to sit there and languish, and for who knows how long. Like, I mean, the terror is real. We're all feeling it in different ways. But I think after 2 months, the anger is really starting to boil up as well. The need to do something, the need to fight back, the need to speak out, and also the developments that have frustrated the Trump administration's agenda, both in the courts and elsewhere, right? So we find ourselves at a very critical moment here at the beginning of April. And I wanted us to sort of end the discussion on that. Like, I could talk to you for hours, but I know I got to let you go. But I wanted to ask if you could say more about, like, how you got involved in the Federal Unionist Network, like what local unions like yours are doing to fight back, and what folks out there listening, whether they work for the government or not, whether they're in a union or not, like, what's your message to folks out there about why they should care about this and what they can do to get involved in the pushback?
Yeah, it's not just an attack on federal workers. I mean, when the administration attacks federal workers, they're basically attacking the American people. because federal workers serve the American people, and we've heard this over and over again, but it has to be said again. If you don't have federal workers, you're not going to have clean air and water. You're not going to have safe food. You might not get your Social Security check. You might get it delayed. I mean, all this is up in the air, Your national parks close, or they'll be restricted to where you can't access all parts of the park. VA services for veterans, health care, benefit, claim processing, that's going to be reduced. And this is for people that don't even work for the government, The FAA, they keep our airline, our airways safe. Our border people that keep, hopefully they're keeping the border safe, and vetting people that are actually dangerous, that this stereotypical myth that everybody that comes across our border, some kind of criminal is just insane, That's scary too. Well, just like you mentioned earlier about the person that they arrested, I think it was in New York the other day, or the El Salvadoran guy they took, what's next? They're going to arrest American people, American citizens because they think you might be linked to a Venezuelan gang or something, And like you said, they'll languish, and you sit there in jail without any kind of due process. I mean, it's just a matter of time. If people don't start fighting this, and I think they are. I mean, it's really, I think in the last 2 months, we've seen the tide start shifting. People are starting to get involved, and I work with a group here. It's called Indivisible Watauga, and I think it's a nationwide group. Indivisible. They're kind of organizing these marches, I think, for April 5th. One of the many groups, and I've talked with a lot of my friends in Indivisible and in the county where I live. And we've been doing a lot of grassroots organizing. I mean, I've been doing it through my union, through these people, but I think that's what it takes is a collective effort, a united front across the community, your community, and the nation to fight this. And I think we're going to be okay, but it's going to be a fight. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we can't rest. We can't rest. We've got to keep the pressure mounted for as long as it takes. I don't think the courts alone are going to be our savior. I think they're important, and I think they'll keep things somewhat between the guardrails. But I think the major power here is going to be us, we the people. If you can get out on April 5th, I think it's a nationwide effort. Find out where April 5th rally is going to be, a hands-off rally, march/rally. I think they're happening everywhere, and I think there's going to be a huge turnout, and I think it's going to send a direct message to Trump and Elon Musk that we're not going to take it. You want to try to be a dictator or king or whatever you're wanting to try to be. It's not going to work out for you because we live in a democracy, and Americans like their democracy, and they will fight to keep it.
All right, gang, that's going to wrap things up for us this week. Once again, I want to thank our guest, James Jones, a veteran and a maintenance mechanic with the National Park Service. And I want to thank you all for listening, and I want to thank you for caring. We'll see y'all back here next week for another episode of Working People. And if you can't wait that long, then go explore all the great work that we're doing at the Real News Network, where we do grassroots journalism, lifting up the voices and stories from the front lines of struggle. Sign up for the Real News newsletter so you never miss a story, and help us do more work like this by going to therealnews.com/donate and becoming a supporter today. It really makes a difference. I'm Maximilian Alvarez. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Solidarity forever.
When my face you no longer see, I live on, yes, I live on. Wherever we go, we are going to roll the Union on. The song I live on, yes, I live on. Wherever hungry are we, just as hungry can be. The song I live on, yes, I live on. Where mean things are happening in this land, it's read a song I live on, yes, I live on. Wherever the book mean things are happening in this land is read, I live on, yes, I live on. Wherever the videotape of me is shown, I live on, yes, I live on. If I have help to make this a better world to live in, silent, and in some lonesome grave, I live on. Yes, I live on. When my songs and poems are read, I live on. Yes, I live